The moment you let someone's words change your temperature, you've surrendered the war before the first shot. You believe standing up for yourself means showing them how much they hurt you. Wrong. Every reaction proves they own a piece of your peace. Why does a stranger's opinion linger for days? Why does being ignored feel like a physical wound? Because somewhere inside, you still need the world to validate your existence. Your feelings aren't your enemy, but their master is. And right now, that master isn't you. It's whoever learned which buttons to push. They speak and you respond like a trained animal. But there's a truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The problem isn't out there. The problem is the version of you that still believes other people control how you feel. Ancient wisdom knew what modern minds forgot. True strength isn't gained by changing others. It's gained by refusing to let others change you. If exhaustion from constant emotional turbulence has become your normal, maybe it's time to stop fighting the waves and learn to swim beneath them. If these words land somewhere real and you're finally ready to build yourself from the ground up, hit subscribe because you deserve a mind that doesn't shatter when the world trembles. It seems like the trigger always comes from outside, right? A glance, a comment, someone being dismissive, interrupting you, treating you like background noise. Immediately, everything inside contracts. Your brain constructs a narrative. Your body prepares for war. But what if that fire wasn't lit by their actions at all? What if the rage building inside isn't caused by what happened, but by what you expected to happen and didn't? That's where the real inferno begins. Not from their behavior, but from the distance between reality and your mental script. The suffering doesn't originate externally. It originates in the space between what occurred and what you demanded should occur. That gap births all anguish. This is the deception of being wronged, the conviction that others determine your inner state. This deception keeps you fragile, perpetually tense, perpetually exposed to the next unexpected critique, the next cold shoulder, the next broken commitment. But ancient philosophers understood differently. They recognized that events themselves don't disturb you. Your interpretation of events does. The meaning you automatically assign without conscious awareness. You're not disturbed because someone canceled. You're disturbed because you've decided it signals your insignificance. You're not furious because someone spoke harshly. You're furious because you've concluded they lack respect. But what if you stopped rushing to judgment? What if you could separate occurrence from interpretation? You'd discover how powerless those moments truly are. This is the difficult part because we've been conditioned from childhood to believe emotions are externally caused. He angered me. She destroyed my mood, but examine it closely, and nobody can create feelings inside you without permission. Feelings aren't injected from outside sources. They're constructed internally based on your processing system. It's an uncomfortable reality because it places responsibility squarely on your shoulders. But it's also liberation because if nobody can manufacture your anger, then nobody can dominate you. That's genuine power. You become unmovable not because people finally cooperate, but because their cooperation is no longer required for your stability. Marcus Aurelius stated it plainly. Your authority exists over your inner world, not external circumstances. Grasp this and strength follows. This isn't mere consolation. It's recognition that the true battle isn't external, it's internal. The world doesn't require transformation for your peace. You simply need to stop granting external events authority over your internal state. Watch how it actually unfolds. Someone delivers harsh words. Instantly, your mind seizes them and sprints. The audacity, they don't value me, I must retaliate. But what genuinely occurred? Vibrations, sounds emerging from another person's vocal cords. The offense, the interpretation, the fury, all additions from your consciousness. Without preconceptions about acceptable speech, their words wouldn't register. you wouldn't even notice. It resembles witnessing someone shouting in an incomprehensible language. It passes through you. That's the capability of a disciplined mind. Not to become emotionless, but to achieve such clarity that you don't mistake background noise for genuine threat. You don't transform every discomfort into catastrophe. You allow existence to proceed naturally, meeting it with clarity rather than compulsion. This isn't about pretending indifference. It's about questioning yourself. Why does this disturb me? What conviction do I hold about this situation that generates feelings of insult or offense? You'll frequently discover the wound didn't come from the person. It came from your image of who they should have been. A friend who fails to appear, a partner who doesn't comprehend, a stranger who doesn't demonstrate respect. You aren't wounded by reality. You're wounded by fantasy, the version you constructed mentally. That's suffering's birthplace. We're seldom damaged by what exists. We're damaged by what we imagined would exist. Therefore, the path forward isn't avoiding people or manipulating every circumstance. It's beginning to observe your expectations. Catch them forming. Notice how rapidly your mind fabricates a vision of proper outcomes and how enraged it becomes when life refuses compliance. That's anger's true residence, not in the world but in resistance to how the world actually functions. Every time you assign others responsibility for your tranquility, you've relinquished it. You've announced to existence that external forces determine your emotional state, but you don't need to continue that pattern. This transformation won't occur instantly. Triggers will still activate. That chest tightness will still appear, heat rising to your face. But if you can pause momentarily and inquire, what narrative am I constructing right now? You'll begin penetrating the illusion. You'll recognize you're not controlled by emotions. You're the one directing them. This isn't about crushing your anger. It's about not being deceived by it, because rage always claims they caused this. But wisdom always responds, I selected this reaction. Feeling hurt doesn't make you weak. Remaining weak happens when that feeling dictates your choices. The stronger route is looking inward, examining the reaction, sitting with discomfort until it evaporates. Carl Jung observed that everything irritating us about others reveals understanding about ourselves. Your anger isn't a defect. It's illumination. It's exposing where you've attached your peace to someone else's conduct. Each time you see that clearly, you reclaim mental territory. This marks the beginning of emotional power, not dominance over others, but command of your own patterns. The world continues moving. People continue disappointing, surprising, provoking, but you don't need to move with them. You can stay grounded. You can become someone who observes, who listens, who experiences and remains steady, not through disconnection, but through such deep self-connection that nothing external can fragment you. That's not avoidance, that's training. And that's where actual power resides. Everyone preaches that reacting demonstrates strength, that when someone crosses boundaries and you strike back, you've triumphed. That raising your voice, walking away, sending the hostile message proves something. That you won't tolerate disrespect, that you're asserting yourself. But genuine self-examination reveals a hidden truth. Most reactions aren't strength, they're programming. Identical emotional circuits replaying endlessly. Someone presses the trigger and you ignite like gunpowder. No thought, no pause, just automatic response. Later, when everything settles, you label it justified. But was it? Or did you once again surrender your mental controls to someone else and let them steer you into chaos? The issue is reaction creates an illusion of power momentarily. That chest surge, that adrenaline rush, it suggests control. But reaction is control's opposite. It's being controlled. It's allowing someone else's behavior to dictate yours. It's transforming your nervous system into a remote anyone can operate. The more it happens, the more automatic it feels. That's addiction's mechanism. Your brain adapts to the pattern. Someone disrespects you, you react. Someone ignores you, you spiral. Someone makes a remark, you take the bait. Each occurrence deepens the groove. You believe you're choosing, but you're just repeating. Epictetus warned about this when he said, "No person is free who isn't self-governed." If your peace collapses with every test, you're not free. You're owned by your reactions. So what does freedom from reaction mean? It doesn't mean eliminating feeling. It means eliminating obedience. You still notice anger. You still feel heat climbing your spine. Your jaw still clenches. Your hands still itch for response. But you don't move, not immediately. You allow the feeling to rise and meet it with awareness, not action. That's where strength actually lives, in the interval between trigger and response. Most people never discover that interval. They react before recognizing what's triggering them. But when you learn pausing, even briefly, you interrupt the pattern. You reclaim your mind. You remember that provocation doesn't equal obligation. Not everything triggering you deserves your energy. Consider the last time genuine anger struck, really struck. Perhaps someone insulted you or ignored your communication, or looked at you strangely. How long did that moment occupy your thoughts? Hours, days, longer? What did it cost? Your concentration, your clarity, your rest. That's reaction's price. It doesn't just steal momentary peace. It follows you. It rewrites your entire day's tone. That energy could have built something, connected someone, facilitated reflection, provided rest. Instead, it burned away on something you probably don't even clearly remember now. Reaction is expensive, and most are emotionally bankrupt. There's also peculiar ego in reaction, a part believing if I don't respond, they'll think I'm weak. If I don't defend myself, they'll think they're correct. But here's the truth most can't accept. Allowing someone to believe they've won sometimes represents the greatest victory, because you're no longer reacting to validate your worth. You already know it. You're no longer defending your image. You've transcended the need to explain yourself. When your value is internal, their words don't adhere. They ricochet, they dissolve. What remains is silence. Not hollow silence, but powerful, intentional stillness. This isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about not being enslaved by it. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it directs your life and you call it fate." Most people believe they're just emotional or short-tempered, as if it's genetic. But what if those reactions are just unconscious programming operating automatically? What if you could unlearn them identically to how you learned them? Through repetition, through awareness, through patience. That's where genuine growth originates, not when triggers disappear, but when getting triggered doesn't mean losing yourself. That's the shift from automatic to intentional, from puppet to puppeteer, from noise to command. You realize reacting doesn't make you strong. It makes you predictable, and predictability is vulnerability. Anyone knowing your triggers can activate them. But when you become unreadable, when your peace isn't available for seizure, you stop being a target. You stop being entertainment for the emotionally chaotic. You become someone who doesn't participate in the game at all, and the game dissolves without your participation. This kind of mastery requires time. It requires awareness. It requires failing, getting pulled in, then catching yourself faster next time. But every time you maintain boundaries, every time you pause instead of reacting, you construct a new identity. One not governed by chaos, but anchored in calm. One that doesn't dance to provocation, but moves only by choice. That's what reclaiming control means, not just of emotions, but of existence. Because fewer things owning your reaction means more energy for what genuinely matters. And that's an existence worth constructing. one pause at a time. It doesn't require much to trigger this internal alarm. A glance, a remark, a conversational pause feeling slightly too extended. A message left unread. And you feel it instantly, this subtle panic suggesting you've been diminished somehow, that someone perceives you as less than you want perceived. From that insecurity place, anger emerges. But here's the trap. If your peace depends on your image being perfectly maintained by others' opinions, you've surrendered power. You've made your calm conditional on things you can never control. The world will always misinterpret, underestimate, and misjudge. That's not the problem. The real problem is believing you must chase every misunderstanding to correct it. That every time someone misunderstands you, you need correction. That every time your name is spoken poorly, you need defense. But truthfully, peace doesn't live in being understood. It lives in being unshaken, even misunderstood. The ego's validation need is endless. It's perpetually hungry. Recognition quantity is irrelevant. There's always someone who will see you smaller. And your ego will beg you to combat that, to argue, to explain, to demonstrate your value until they finally agree. But even if they do, satisfaction doesn't last, because it was never about truth. It was about ego, and ego feeds on conflict. It convinces you every disagreement is threat, that every challenge to your image is a battle requiring victory. But winning in that space never leads to freedom. It leads to exhaustion. The more you defend your identity, the more fragile it becomes. Imagine life differently if you didn't need people to see you a certain way. If you could be content with being underestimated, misread, or even disliked without it disturbing your inner stability. That's not apathy. That's maturity. That's strength. Epictetus once said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Most people would never vocalize that, but the fear of being perceived that way runs deep. It's why we argue when someone questions our knowledge, why we interrupt to prove superior understanding, why we can't sit in silence when feeling dismissed. But if you can learn releasing that fear, something incredible happens. You gain access to peace nobody can take from you because your self-worth is no longer up for debate. This doesn't mean allowing disrespect. It means choosing how you respond to it. There's a significant difference between setting boundaries and defending your ego. One protects your space, the other tries protecting your story. One is grounded, the other is reactive. Most of what we call boundaries are just ego-wearing armor. Real strength is when you can walk away not because you're angry, but because you no longer find value in explaining yourself. When you know who you are so deeply that someone's misunderstanding feels like background noise instead of personal threat. Think about how much energy you've spent trying to be seen correctly, how many conversations you've replayed, how many texts you've written and rewritten, how many moments you've destroyed for yourself because your mind was caught in image management's web. The ego says, don't let them think that about you. But your higher self whispers what they think has nothing to do with your truth. That shift is powerful. It's the moment you stop living as a reaction to how others perceive you and start living from a calm, centered place that doesn't need permission to exist. Carl Jung believed the parts of ourselves we avoid become the very things controlling us. The ego avoids weakness, foolishness, vulnerability. It hides those things in darkness and fights like a cornered animal when they're brought to light. But what if you could embrace those shadows instead of fearing them? What if someone thinking you're wrong or small or foolish didn't trigger internal battle, but invited curiosity or silence or even a quiet smile? That's not weakness, that's evolution. You begin feeling compassion for those who try to hurt you, not because you've given up, but because you've outgrown the need to be on their level. You no longer need to match their energy because you're no longer operating from the same fragile framework. There's a weight that comes with needing constant understanding. a constant pressure to correct, to justify, to perform. But the moment you set that weight down, you begin feeling what real self-respect feels like. It's not about shouting who you are. It's about knowing who you are and letting your presence do the rest. And that knowing, that stillness, that's what silences the noise. Not because the world stops speaking, but because you no longer need to listen to what doesn't align with truth. And your truth doesn't need defending. It needs living quietly, steadily, and without ego. Some people don't speak to communicate, they speak to provoke. Their words are weapons, not tools. Their tone is a trap, not a bridge. And when they throw those verbal jabs, they're not hoping for clarity. They're hoping for chaos. What they want is a reaction, not because they need your opinion, but because they feed on your energy. When you bite, you give them what they want. When you fight, you give them power. But silence, real, calm, composed silence, is something they never expect. It confuses them. It unsettles them. It holds up a mirror they can't escape, because in that stillness, their noise echoes back at them. And without your reaction to distract them, they have no choice but to face the source of their own unrest. Most people misunderstand what silence really is. They think it's weakness, that if you don't respond, you've accepted defeat, that if you walk away, you've surrendered. But silence isn't surrender, it's strategy, it's presence, it's control. Anyone can yell back, anyone can slam the door, type the long message, launch the insult. That takes no discipline. But to feel the pull to respond and still choose not to, that's mastery, that's power, because true power doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need a microphone. It knows what it is and moves only when necessary. Anything more than that becomes theater. And if your strength depends on proving it, it's not strength at all. It's insecurity dressed in noise. It's hard at first. When someone crosses a line, the instinct to defend yourself rises fast. The urge to set the record straight, to clap back, to make them feel what they made you feel. But in those moments, you have to ask, what am I really fighting for? Is it justice or validation? Is it clarity or control? Often it's not about what they did. It's about how they made you feel. And we try to fix that feeling by changing them. But they're not yours to fix. And the moment you chase their attention, their apology, their correction, you place your peace in their hands. That's not justice, that's dependency. Real peace doesn't come from their silence, it comes from yours. Silence, when chosen with intention, becomes a form of emotional self-respect. It's not about being cold or distant. It's about knowing which battles are beneath you, not because they're unimportant, but because your peace is more valuable than your pride. Seneca once wrote, "A great mind becomes a great fortune." That fortune isn't money or fame. It's stillness, clarity, strength that doesn't shout. Stillness is a kind of wealth that can't be stolen. And in a world obsessed with noise, the quiet ones stand out. Not because they demand attention, but because they don't need it. You'll notice something strange when you start practicing this kind of calm. People will begin testing you more, not less. They'll say things just to see if you'll break. They'll poke at your silence, not because they're brave, but because your self-control challenges their instability. It makes them uncomfortable, and people hate being uncomfortable. So they'll try to drag you into the same chaos they're drowning in, hoping you'll flail too. But if you can stay still, even when your ego begs for a response, something powerful shifts. You no longer match their energy. You control the atmosphere. You stop being pulled and start becoming the one who anchors. Carl Jung believed that what we resist persists. When we resist being misunderstood, we stay trapped in the loop of needing to explain. When we resist the discomfort of silence, we end up filling it with noise that weakens us. But when we accept that not everything must be responded to, we begin to reclaim our energy. We stop reacting and start observing, and in that space, we realize how little power others actually have unless we hand it to them. Silence then becomes a boundary, a way of saying, "I hear you, but I choose not to participate in this." That choice is what separates reaction from response, weakness from wisdom. You won't get it perfect every time. There will be moments when you slip, when you say too much, when you explain yourself to someone who doesn't care to understand. But every time you return to stillness, you reinforce the new pattern. You teach your mind that peace isn't something that needs defending, it just needs protecting. And sometimes protection looks like a breath instead of a word, a pause instead of a comeback, a closed mouth instead of an open wound. Eventually, silence becomes your default, not because you're disconnected, but because you've learned that loudness rarely changes minds, that arguments often create distance, not clarity, and that those who truly see you don't need explanations. The rest will see whatever their mind is already prepared to believe. Let them. You don't need to carry their confusion. You don't need to meet them where they are just to prove you're above them. The most dignified thing you can do is stay still while others unravel around you, because it's not your job to correct every perspective, only to live from one that brings you peace. And peace is quiet. It doesn't perform. It doesn't fight for attention. It simply exists like water in a deep well, calm, clear, undisturbed. You can visit it whenever you choose, but no one else can poison it unless you let them. And when people come with their storms, their noise, their chaos, you no longer open the door. You don't yell back through it. You don't throw anything at it. You just let it knock and pass. Because the silence that comes from strength is not empty. It's full of everything they wish they could control in you, but can't. People often confuse detachment with apathy. They think it means turning your heart off, walking through life untouched, uncaring, numb to everything and everyone. But that's not detachment, that's escape. True detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being ruled by what you feel. It's not a wall, it's a window, clear and calm. You still see, you still sense, you still hurt, and you still love, but you do it without drowning in it. You make space between the feeling and the reaction. You learn to observe before you act. That space is where your strength grows. So much of our suffering comes from being swept up in waves we never pause to look at. We feel something sharp and we immediately respond without asking why it's there. But imagine if you paused instead, not to suppress, not to deny, but to understand. What is this feeling trying to tell me? Is it about this moment, or is it about something older, something I've carried for years without noticing? That's the gift of detachment. It slows everything down just enough for you to hear what your emotions are really saying before they take the wheel. You stop being a slave to impulse. You stop living on edge. Most people think reacting quickly shows confidence, but it often shows fear. It shows how badly we want to avoid sitting with discomfort, how quickly we want to silence anything that feels threatening. But growth doesn't happen in that speed. It happens in the pause. It happens in the quiet moment where you feel the discomfort rise, and instead of running, you lean in. We live in a culture that rewards dramatics. The louder the outrage, the more attention it gets. The more reactive you are, the more you seem real or passionate. But real passion doesn't flail, it focuses. Real power doesn't scream, it chooses. Detachment isn't emptiness. It's the ability to respond instead of react. It's clarity, it's strength under pressure. It's when you can hold your emotional fire in your hands without burning yourself or anyone else. That kind of control is rare. That kind of peace is earned. There's also a hidden fear in many people when it comes to detachment. The fear that if I don't react, people will think I don't care. That if I stay calm, I'll be seen as weak, cold, distant. But here's the truth. People might misread your silence, but they will never mistake your self-possession. They'll notice when you don't fall into the trap. when you stay calm while others spin. They might not say it, but they'll feel it. And slowly, they'll learn that their chaos has no grip on you, that your emotions are yours, not something for them to pull like strings. And this isn't about being better than anyone else. It's not superiority, it's stability, it's emotional maturity. When you stop reacting to everything, you start responding to what actually matters. Not every opinion is worth your breath. Not every argument is worth your peace. Not every invitation to chaos needs to be accepted. Detachment teaches you to be selective with your energy, to invest it, not leak it, to place it where it grows something, not just where it burns. It's easy to mistake this kind of self-discipline for detachment in the unhealthy sense, but the key difference is intention. Detachment from a place of fear avoids connection. Detachment from a place of strength deepens it, because now you're not entering relationships to complete yourself or defend yourself. You're coming in whole. You're offering your presence, not your dependency. That's the version of you people can actually feel safe around, because you're not reacting out of old wounds. You're responding with awareness. This is emotional mastery. Not perfection, not suppression, but the ability to feel fully without being consumed. The ability to stay connected to your inner world while interacting with the outer one. You still care deeply, but now you care wisely. You no longer let someone else's behavior decide the shape of your day. You choose that. You no longer chase closure from those who don't understand you. You offer yourself peace and let them keep their misunderstandings. That's what real freedom looks like. And it's not something that happens overnight. You will forget. You will fall into old habits. You will react and regret and want to rewind. But that's okay, because every moment you remember, you rebuild. Every time you choose the pause, the breath, the awareness, you get stronger. Detachment isn't a finish line. It's a way of moving through life. It's how you meet pain without flinching, how you face disappointment without collapsing, how you walk through noise without losing your quiet center. In the end, the goal isn't to stop feeling, it's to feel everything and still act with wisdom, to let your emotions visit but never let them make your choices for you, to recognize the storm but not get pulled into it, to understand what hurts you and learn from it instead of being ruled by it. That's detachment, not absence, not indifference, just strength. Steady, rooted strength. The kind that doesn't shout, but holds. The kind that lets you breathe deeply, think clearly, and move forward, not from habit, but from truth. Anger often feels justified. It rises quickly, fills your chest, narrows your vision, and convinces you that it's the right response to what just happened, that someone else's words, actions, or attitude crossed a line. But if you look closely, really look, you'll find that most of the time, anger doesn't start in cruelty. It starts in confusion. You don't understand why they acted that way, why they said that, why they suddenly pulled away, lashed out, lied, or ignored you. And in the space where understanding is missing, your mind fills in the gaps with judgment, with assumptions, with stories that center you as the target and them as the threat. But what if that space didn't have to be filled with fire? What if it could be filled with insight? When you begin to understand what drives someone else's behavior, you take away its power to shake you. You start to see that the sharpness in their voice wasn't about you, it was about the chaos they carry. That the coldness in their silence wasn't rejection, it was fear. That their need to dominate, impress, or mock comes from insecurity, not strength. You stop personalizing behavior that was never personal to begin with. Not because you excuse it, not because it's acceptable, but because you see through it. And once you see clearly, anger loses its grip. Most people aren't waking up in the morning looking for ways to hurt others. They're waking up trying to survive their own mess. Their behavior is often a reflection of internal storms they've never learned to calm. The one who lashes out might be desperate to feel seen. The one who manipulates might be terrified of being abandoned. The one who always needs to be right might feel worthless without control. Understanding this doesn't make the behavior okay, but it makes it easier to meet it without being pulled under by it, because once you recognize that their chaos belongs to them, you stop making it yours. Socrates once said, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle." And it's not a poetic idea. It's a truth most people never slow down enough to absorb. That battle isn't always visible. It's not marked on their face or written in their tone, but it's there, buried beneath habits, defense mechanisms, pride, silence, overcompensation. The problem is when you don't see the battle, you assume it's about you. You react as if every rude comment is an attack. Every passive-aggressive joke is aimed straight at your worth. But when you understand that pain often dresses itself in armor, your instinct to react softens. This kind of understanding doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. Because now you're responding to what's real, not just what's loud. Now you can choose how to engage or whether to engage at all. You don't get baited into emotional games. You don't need to match their tone or prove your point. You see what's driving them and you decide what kind of energy you want to meet it with. Sometimes that's compassion. Sometimes it's boundaries. But it's no longer reaction. It's choice, and choice is where your strength lives. Carl Jung taught that what we do not understand in others often points to what we have not yet understood in ourselves. So when someone's behavior triggers you deeply, there's usually a lesson there, something unexamined, something unresolved. Maybe it's your need to be respected, or your fear of being unseen or a part of you that still feels like you have to fight for your place. Understanding others also opens the door to understanding yourself, because the clearer you see them, the more clearly you begin to see your own wounds, your own reflexes, your own patterns of reaction. Think about how many arguments were simply misunderstandings, how many broken connections came from reacting before pausing to see the full picture. Understanding isn't just a tool, it's protection. When you understand, you don't waste energy on the surface level. You get to the root. You see the fear behind the insult, the insecurity behind the arrogance, the pain behind the anger. And that kind of vision makes you powerful, not in a loud, dominant way, but in a quiet, immovable one. You're no longer shaken by every wave because you've learned to read the water. But this level of understanding takes practice. It requires you to slow down when your instincts say speed up, to observe when your pride says strike, to listen when your ego says speak. It's not about overanalyzing every interaction. It's about choosing clarity over confusion, choosing perspective over projection, choosing to learn instead of lash out. And it doesn't always mean staying in situations that hurt. Sometimes understanding someone means walking away from them, not with bitterness, but with peace, because you finally understand that their behavior is theirs to carry, not yours to fix. The more you train yourself to look deeper, the less you feel the need to defend. You start to recognize that not everything deserves a reaction, that not every opinion needs to be corrected, that not every cold look needs to be warmed. Some people are simply revealing where they are on their journey, and you're observing, you're learning. And in that learning, you're growing stronger, more centered, less shaken. You become the one who moves with awareness, not impulse. And perhaps the greatest part of understanding is what it unlocks in you. When you stop being triggered, you start becoming free. You begin to carry less resentment, less blame. You open up more space inside for peace, for clarity, for growth. You stop rehearsing arguments in your head. You stop holding grudges. You stop needing revenge. Not because people hurt you less, but because their actions no longer land the same way. You see the story behind their behavior, and you let it pass. Understanding becomes the antidote. It soothes the part of you that used to overreact. It calms the part that used to feel attacked. It strengthens the part of you that used to shrink. It doesn't require you to tolerate disrespect, but it frees you from being disturbed by it. That's what makes it so powerful. It replaces confusion with clarity, clarity with calm, and calm with choice. So when the world tries to pull you into noise, you meet it with vision. When others show you who they are, you don't argue, you observe. Because you've learned that their battle isn't yours. Your peace is, and you won't trade it away for anything less than understanding. Most people believe they're in control of their actions, that when they raise their voice, walk away, slam the door, or hit send on that impulsive message, it was a conscious choice. But if you look closely, really closely, you'll see that much of what you call choice is just reaction wearing a disguise. Someone says something sharp and you snap back before your breath even returns. It happens fast, too fast to be deliberate. That moment, the one between their words and your reaction, is where your power could have lived. But most people never step into it. They skip right over it. They don't even know it's there. That space is called the pause. And if you can master it, your entire life starts to shift. It's a strange thing to notice that sliver of time, barely a second, where your body starts to tighten, your jaw clenches, your heart races. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff. Everything inside you wants to jump, to react, to defend, attack, or explain. But in that space, if you learn to stay still just long enough to notice, something powerful happens. You start to see clearly. The emotion is still there. Anger, shame, hurt, but it's no longer steering. You recognize that you have a choice to feed the fire or to let it burn out on its own, to give someone access to your peace or to guard it. That moment is where real control lives. And it's not easy. The pause feels unnatural at first. You'll want to fill it with words, with action, with movement, anything to escape the discomfort of just feeling. But that discomfort is the training ground. Every time you hold it, even for a breath, you're rewiring your nervous system, teaching your body that intensity doesn't require immediacy, that not every emotional spike needs an external release, that you can feel deeply and still remain calm, and that's not suppression, that's strength. Carl Jung said, even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, and the word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness. What that reminds us is that life isn't about avoiding the uncomfortable. It's about learning to stand within it without losing yourself. The pause gives you that balance. It helps you see the situation for what it is, not just what your ego interprets it to be. You stop reacting to what you fear and start responding to what you understand. It's a shift from being on autopilot to being awake. And in that wakefulness, you notice things. You notice the stories your mind tries to tell in the heat of the moment. Stories about being disrespected, unappreciated, threatened. Stories that often have little to do with reality and everything to do with your own unhealed patterns. Without the pause, you believe those stories immediately. But with it, you get to question them. Is this actually about now, or is it about something older, something deeper? That's how growth happens. Through awareness, not reaction. When you master the pause, you don't become passive. You become precise. You don't lose your voice. You sharpen it. You don't tolerate everything. You just learn not to respond from the first wave of emotion. That first wave is usually the least honest. It's fast, protective, raw. But the truth, the calm, steady truth, comes in the second wave, the one that only arrives when you give it room to speak. And the pause is what makes that room. It's also where your relationships begin to change. People notice when you stop reacting the way you used to, when you don't escalate, when you don't take the bait. Some will feel confused. Some might get louder, trying to pull you back into the old pattern. but others will feel your steadiness and begin to meet you there. Because calm is contagious. The way you handle tension teaches people how to treat you, and when you no longer reward chaos with chaos, it starts to die off. But this isn't just about others, it's about how you meet yourself. How many times have you regretted what you said in anger? How many times have you wished you'd waited just a moment longer before acting? That regret. It's your intuition showing you that a pause was needed, that you moved too fast, that you weren't acting from your values, but from your wounds. The pause helps you close that gap so you don't keep betraying your own sense of integrity for the sake of being right or being heard in the heat of the moment. And there's something humbling in that, because you start to see how often you've been at the mercy of your emotions, how often you've thought you were defending yourself when really you were defending your ego. That realization doesn't shame you, it frees you. It shows you where your work is, not in perfecting your image, but in practicing your presence. Seneca once said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." The pause is a kind of adversity. It asks you to prove yourself, not to the world, but to your own mind. To prove that you can stay steady when everything inside you wants to run, that you can choose clarity over impulse, stillness over noise. That's not something you declare once. It's something you do again and again until it becomes your way of being. And slowly, it does. The more you step into that space, the more natural it feels. Your reactions soften. Your presence deepens. You stop being pulled into every storm. You start becoming the calm within it. People notice the difference, but more importantly, so do you. You start to trust yourself more because you've shown yourself that you don't need to explode to be strong. You don't need to react to be real. You just need to stay long enough in the pause to choose the version of you that's aligned, not just the one that's loud. Mastering the pause isn't about becoming emotionless. It's about becoming emotionally mature. It's not about holding everything in. It's about holding it wisely, letting it rise, letting it speak, but not letting it take the wheel. And with time, you realize that most of what you thought needed a reaction never really did. That most of the battles you fought weren't necessary. That the peace you've been chasing was always hidden in that one simple act, waiting, not because you're passive, but because you're powerful enough to pause. There's a point in this journey where something begins to shift. Not loudly, not all at once, but like the quiet cracking of old ice beneath your feet. You realize you no longer feel the same pull to understand every word spoken about you. You stop needing to fix misunderstandings, the questions that used to loop endlessly in your mind. Why did they treat me like that? What did they mean by that comment? Why didn't they value me? They begin to dissolve, not because you found the answers, but because you realized you never needed them. Closure, it turns out, was never theirs to give. It was something you learned to grant yourself, the moment you stopped demanding it from people who couldn't even offer you clarity if they tried. And this doesn't mean you've become indifferent or numb. That's not it. In fact, you feel more deeply than before, but differently. You no longer react to every emotion like it's a command. You don't flinch at discomfort. You don't feel the need to explain your silence, your distance, your peace. The world might still swirl with opinions and noise, but it no longer leaks into your sense of self. You've built a kind of quiet within, a home where your worth isn't constantly up for negotiation. You begin to recognize how much of your past suffering came not from what happened, but from your refusal to let it pass without chasing it, analyzing it, or proving something in response. This is what happens when the inner world becomes enough. When your values, your truth, your stillness become so deeply rooted that nothing on the outside has the power to pull you out of alignment. You stop chasing control because you've embodied it. You stop searching for peace because you are it. You stop defending yourself because you finally believe in the life you're living. And the opinions that once haunted you now sound like echoes, faint, far, and unable to touch the foundation you've spent so long building. People may still misunderstand you. They may still project their own wounds onto you, twist your intentions, paint you with brushes dipped in their fears, but you don't move to correct them anymore. You don't feel the urgency to set the record straight, not because you've given up on being seen, but because you've stopped trying to convince people who were never looking clearly to begin with. Your life no longer bends to the approval of others, and in that freedom, you gain a rare kind of peace, the kind that cannot be taken, only surrendered, and you don't surrender it anymore. There's a freedom in no longer explaining yourself, a freedom in silence, in not needing to be right, in letting others carry their opinions without trying to change them. It's not weakness, it's strength. It's not defeat, it's evolution. You realize that your energy is a currency, and you've wasted too much of it in the past on battles that didn't matter, on trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding, on trying to win wars that only existed in your head. Now you spend that energy building, creating, loving, resting, growing, because peace, once protected, becomes your highest priority. Aristotle once said it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it, and that includes the thoughts others try to plant inside you. Not every opinion that reaches your ears deserves space in your mind. Not every judgment needs to be unpacked, argued with, or disproved. When someone throws a label at you, you don't wear it. You examine it, and most often you let it fall to the floor because you no longer build your identity from recycled opinions. You build it from something deeper, something quieter, something that doesn't change with moods or moments. This kind of internal freedom doesn't make you distant. It makes you grounded. You become the kind of person who listens more, speaks less, and observes with a patience that comes only from inner clarity. You walk into rooms without needing to dominate them. You exit situations without needing to justify your decision. You let others think what they need to, and you carry on, not from arrogance, but from alignment. Not because you're trying to appear strong, but because you no longer need to perform strength. You are strong, and it shows in the peace you protect. And yes, people will still test you, not out of malice, but because something in your stillness triggers what they've left unresolved. Your calmness will feel unfamiliar. Your silence will seem like defiance. Your detachment might be mistaken for judgment, but you're no longer responsible for how they interpret your peace. That belongs to them. You've spent enough time trying to make others comfortable with your boundaries. Now you honor them without apology because your growth is not up for debate. Eventually, you'll notice that the moments which used to consume you now pass through you like a breeze. You feel them, yes, but they no longer stay. They don't latch on. You no longer carry other people's chaos like it's your responsibility to clean it up. You recognize what's yours and what's not. And what's not yours, you let go, not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom. Because carrying what doesn't belong to you isn't kindness. It's self-abandonment, and you've done enough of that in the past. Now you return to yourself every single time, to the place that no longer needs fixing, to the voice inside that doesn't scream but speaks with quiet certainty, to the truth that doesn't demand to be believed, only lived. And in that return, you experience the final freedom. Not just freedom from others, but freedom from your own old self. The self that needed to be liked, the self that needed to win, the self that needed to be heard even when the room wasn't listening. That self begins to rest, and what rises in its place is something steadier, stronger, and far more at peace. You don't need to fight for peace when you become the source of it. And once the noise outside no longer shakes the quiet inside, you've already won. If you found value in this message and you're ready to continue building this strength, show some love by hitting that like button for Stoic wisdom. There's another powerful lesson waiting on your screen that will take you even further down this path. Thank you for being here. Thank you for walking this journey with us.